Did you ever wonder what happened with Noah's flood? Where did the water come from? Where did it go? I know there's a lot of videos out there on this, and I'm not just going to regurgitate a whole bunch of other people's ideas. You're going to get my unique insight on this, how I look at things, and how I try to break things down scientifically. And if you're interested in such a video, come along. Okay, before we get to where it came from and where it went, we first got to talk a little bit about water and the earth itself. Water is pretty unique. Water has some pretty interesting qualities to it. Water has surface tension, which comes into being on our planet quite handily. If you think about how water exists, it exists on our planet, and usually it exists in ice, in liquid form, and also gaseous form, which is important because you need a recycling of water because we're all water based. We're over 90% water. So we need a planet that can accommodate us and accommodate the water. Now, if you think about it, water has surface tension. If you ever tried to turn like your coffee pot over, and if you have a crappy coffee pot like mine, it'll cling to the side and run down. And that's from the surface tension of the water. And that's important. Surface tension is extremely important because you have dust in the air and the vapors will collect on the dust and it'll rain down. So you need a constant way to clean the water. So sand on the earth, water rains down, filters through the sand, and then into the aquifers underneath, or directly into the ocean. But water has a constant way because of this surface tension. It has a constant way of regenerating itself and keeping itself clean, because we know water that sits is stagnant. Now, a little bit about the earth. God designed the earth for us to live on. So what happens if the water is all in the oceans? Well, we can't drink that. It's salt water. Well, okay, we can go to lakes. All right, but what if you're not at a lake? What if you're not near a river? How do you get water? Well, God created that answer too. He packed our ground with sand and soil and other materials. And the water filters down so that anywhere we go on the land, we could just simply dig a well down and get water. And it's very simple, a simple concept, but it's actually, quite clever, quite ingenious, because all the plants of the earth needed water. They need water, animals need water, everything needs water. Water is the basis of life. Okay, let's go back to the origin of water and where we first see it in the Bible. And you first see it in Genesis 1:9, and I'm going to read Genesis 1:9 for you here. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. Okay, now, picture this in your mind. What is that? What is he saying? He's saying the earth is covered with water, right? And then dry land appeared. Okay, did the dry land just go poof and it was there? Or think about it logically. Think about it logically. The water seeping into the land and the dry land appears. How does that sound? That's probably what happened. So the flood waters were always here. Noah's flood was always beneath our feet. But here's the interesting point. If you remember in Genesis 2, I got it right here, 2:6, but there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. So now if you remember, this tells you that before Noah's flood, about 1,500 years in from creation, there was the plants and everything was watered via mist, via stream, via spring. Everything, that was the way the water was. And then when Noah's flood came about was the first time they actually saw rain. So the flood waters came from the rain and from the aquifer below. Now, how can that happen? Think about this logically. How can that happen? So the waters came out of the springs, right, and filled up. And the water basically come out of our ground. If you've ever seen, like in a city where the drain sewers back up from too much water and the water just comes out of the manhole, that's sort of what would have happened with Noah's flood, in my opinion. Okay, that sounds good. But how do you get the water out of the ground? How do you get it out of the ground in one shot? Let's think about this a little bit. Let's say when the earth was first formed, if you see how God talks about the earth being formed, first he says the water, then the firmament, right? So we have now going to have an atmosphere. So if God charged the atmosphere, let's say it usually rains. There's a lot of factors to this too, and I'm not an expert on weather, but it usually rains when the barometric pressure gets below 30 inches of mercury. I'm just going to use that as a roundabout. But let's say in the beginning, God pressurized the earth, the atmosphere. Let's say he pressurized it to 40, even 60. Maybe he pressurized it a lot because it says it didn't rain. So under high pressure, we know we don't get rain, right? Under high pressure. So when the flood came about, what if he dropped it? Not below 30. We've had some of our most damaging hurricanes was down to 27. The pressure dropped to 27, and some of these things creating torrential downpours. But let's say he dropped it further. Let's say he dropped it from like 40 or 50 down to about 25. What would happen? What would happen if you dropped the pressure that fast? Think of a bottle of soda. When you open a bottle of soda, it's pressurized from the carbon dioxide, which is in water. So when you think about it, when you break that, if you looked at it slowly, if you looked at it under a high-speed camera, you'd see that the water shoot up. It shoots upward. That's the same thing that would happen. You'd have the water shooting up out of the springs. And I'm going to posit this too, because the Bible doesn't mention this. What if before the flood, the earth was Pangea, like we said, and it broke the continents apart? Let's say he released all this energy at once. And I know off the east coast of America, we have this trench that's there, which the springs came out. What if this violent action, they don't know what's going on. What if this violent action actually split the continents and blew them apart? I'm just speculating here, but you see where I'm going with this. There could be a relationship between the weather and the barometric pressure. So if he would drop this down, and then afterwards, when the earth is flood, he creeped it back up to where we have it today. And the water simply did like it did in the beginning, seeped right back down into the earth. To me, this is the most logical explanation of what happened. Now, I know there's a lot of videos out there. I haven't seen any of them because I don't want to get tainted into regurgitating other people's ideas. This is what I think happened, and to me, this seems like the most likely event. And I don't think God wants to use tricks as much as he can. I think it's too difficult just to make things appear and disappear. I think that's just not feasible. When God has other ways to do it, he can gently do it. He persuades the weather all the time. So these are some thoughts that I had. Okay, I think I'm going to end with this. You want proof on the earth that it was flooded and that the water went down. I'm going to show you a vacation photo that I took. And this is in Atlantic City. And a lot of us that live on the East Coast, we go through this. We get these storms they call nor'easters that just come in and they pound the coast. And a lot of times they eat the beach away. And then they just leave at the sand dune, a flat wall where the ocean actually just comes in and bangs against the wall. But this photo I took, this is about 3 months. This is in the summer in Atlantic City, 3 months after a nor'easter had come through and wiped out the beach. And you can't really tell that a lot of the beach is gone where I was standing when I took this photo. But take a look at that wall and how it's striated like this. And in the bottom, there's a little mountain of sand. And it kind of preserved quite well through the summer. And when you look at another Western movie, you see all mountains that look like that, that were standing straight up, that are striated, and then you see the lines on them. And to me, when you look at all these mountains, they're all flat at the top, and you have these mountains down, and then they walk through these valleys. Watch it when you see a Western, but you'll see it's that same pattern on the wall. So I think like those areas that you see in these westerns, I think they were filled up with water maybe for decades and slowly went down, and leaving those lines this way, but also those vertical lines that you see from the actual, the actual violence of the water. I think I'll leave it here.